Genesis chapter 26 verse 1. And there was a famine in the land, beside the first famine that was in the days of Abraham. And Isaac went unto Abimelech king of the Philistines unto Gerar. This verse is part of the larger narrative of Isaac's life in the book of Genesis. Let's explore its context and significance. Context: Genesis chapter 26 recounts the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah. At this point in the narrative, Isaac is living in the land of Canaan, the promised land given to his father Abraham by God. However, a famine strikes the land, and Isaac faces the challenge of how to sustain himself and his family during this difficult time. Significance: faithfulness to God's promises. The verse highlights the parallels between Isaac's situation and that of his father Abraham. Isaac faced a famine similar to the one Abraham experienced in the past. Despite the challenging circumstances, Isaac's response to the famine reveals his faithfulness to God's promises. He does not immediately leave the land but seeks a solution within the land that God had promised to bless. Gerar and Abimelech. In response to the famine, Isaac goes to Gerar, a place in the land of the Philistines. Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, ruled over Gerar. Isaac's choice to go to Abimelech indicates his hope for provision and protection in a foreign land. This encounter with Abimelech becomes a significant part of Isaac's journey and reveals important lessons about trust in God. Lessons in trust and reliance on God. Isaac's journey to Gerar and his encounter with Abimelech provide valuable insights into trusting God's guidance. In subsequent verses, Isaac initially presents his wife, Rebekah, as his sister, echoing a similar situation involving Abraham and Sarah in the past. However, Isaac eventually reveals the truth, and Abimelech, recognizing God's favor on Isaac, ensures his safety and security. This account underscores the importance of trusting in God's providence and being truthful in our dealings with others. Continuity of God's plan. Despite the famine, Isaac's journey to Gerar ultimately serves as part of God's unfolding plan for Isaac and his descendants. The events that follow in Genesis chapter 26 reveal God's faithfulness to his promises to bless Isaac and make his descendants numerous. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 1 captures a pivotal moment in Isaac's life, showcasing his faithfulness to God's promises, his reliance on God in times of famine, and the ongoing fulfillment of God's plan for Isaac and his descendants. Genesis chapter 26 verse 2. And the Lord appeared unto him, and said, Go not down into Egypt, dwell in the land which I shall tell thee of. Context: Genesis chapter 26 records the events in the life of Isaac, the son of Abraham. During this time, there was a famine in the land, and Isaac considered going to Egypt for relief. However, in this verse, God appears to Isaac and instructs him not to go to Egypt but to stay in the land that God will direct him to. God's appearance. One important aspect of this verse is that it shows God's personal interaction with Isaac. God appears to him to provide guidance and direction. This reveals God's care and involvement in the lives of his people. It also demonstrates that God can communicate with individuals directly. Obedience to God's word. God's command to Isaac was clear: Go not down into Egypt. Despite the difficult circumstances, Isaac was called to trust God's guidance and stay where God wanted him to be. This verse highlights the importance of obedience to God's word, even when it goes against our own plans or desires. Isaac's faithfulness to God's instruction serves as an example for us to follow. God's provision. God not only tells Isaac not to go to Egypt but promises to provide for him in the land he will show him. God is not only concerned with Isaac's immediate physical needs but also has a long-term plan for him. This shows God's faithfulness and provision for his people, even in challenging times. Trusting God's plan. Isaac had to trust God's plan and his promise to provide for him in the land. This required faith and patience. Similarly, in our own lives, we are called to trust in God's plan, even when it may seem uncertain or challenging. This verse encourages us to rely on God's wisdom and guidance, knowing that His plans are ultimately for our good. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 2 teaches us about God's personal interaction with His people, the importance of obedience to God's word, His faithfulness in providing for our needs, and the need to trust in His plans. It serves as a reminder that God desires to lead and guide us, and when we submit to His instructions, He will take care of us. Genesis chapter 26 verse 3, "Sojourn in this land, and I will be with thee, and will bless thee, for unto thee, and unto thy seed, I will give all these countries, and I will perform the oath which I swear unto Abraham thy father." This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and it reveals an important promise and covenant made by God to Isaac. Let's explore the verse in its context and delve into its significance. In Genesis chapter 26, we find Isaac facing a similar situation to that of his father Abraham. Famine had struck the land, and Isaac, prompted by the circumstances, considers going to Egypt for relief. However, God intervenes and instructs Isaac not to go down to Egypt, but to dwell in the land where he would guide him. This instruction comes with a powerful promise from God: "I will be with thee, and will bless thee." This promise echoes the covenant made by God with Isaac's father, Abraham. God had promised to bless Abraham, make him a great nation, and bless all the families of the earth through him. Genesis chapter 12 verse 1 through verse 3. Now, in Genesis chapter 26 verse 3, God reiterates His commitment to fulfill the covenant with Abraham by extending it to Isaac. "For unto thee, and unto thy seed, I will give all these countries." God reaffirms His pledge to give the land to Isaac and his descendants, just as He had promised Abraham. This verse not only assures Isaac of God's presence and blessing in the immediate circumstance but also confirms the continuity of God's plan and purpose for the chosen people. It demonstrates God's faithfulness and His commitment to fulfill His promises across generations. Through this promise, God assures Isaac that he will inherit the land promised to Abraham, and his descendants will become a great nation. Furthermore, the verse reveals that God will perform the oath He swore to Abraham. God's promises are not empty words but rather the expression of His unwavering faithfulness and power. The fulfillment of His promises is rooted in His unchanging nature and His ability to bring to pass what He has declared. This reassurance would have been a great source of encouragement for Isaac, strengthening his faith in God's plan and His ability to sustain him in the land. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 26 verse 3, we can draw several valuable lessons. First, we learn about God's faithfulness to His covenant promises. God is a keeper of His word, and He can be trusted to fulfill what He has spoken. Second, we see the importance of obedience and trust. Isaac's willingness to heed God's instruction to stay in the land, even amidst adversity, positioned him to receive the blessings and promises of God. Finally, we recognize that God's blessings extend beyond our immediate circumstances. His plans span generations, and He invites us to participate in His redemptive work. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 3 captures a pivotal moment in Isaac's life, where God reaffirms His promise and covenant with him. Through this verse, we see the faithfulness of God, the significance of obedience, and the assurance of His blessings and provision. It serves as a reminder of God's enduring commitment to His people and His unwavering faithfulness throughout generations. Genesis chapter 26 verse 4, "And I will make thy seed to multiply as the stars of heaven, and will give unto thy seed all these countries, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed." This verse is part of a conversation between God and Isaac, the son of Abraham. It is a reaffirmation of the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac's father. Let's break down the verse and explore its key themes and meanings. Multiplication of descendants. God promises Isaac that he will make his descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. This is an assurance of the future growth and abundance of Isaac's descendants. It echoes God's earlier promise to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 verse 5, where God told him to look at the stars and said, "So shall thy seed be." The reference to the stars emphasizes the vast number of Isaac's offspring. Inheritance of the land. God also assures Isaac that he will give his descendants all the countries mentioned in the context. In the preceding verses, Genesis chapter 26 verses 1 through 3, Isaac faces a famine and considers going to Egypt for relief. However, God instructs him to stay in the land of Canaan and reiterates the promise of land inheritance made to Abraham. This reaffirms that the land of Canaan is the rightful possession of Isaac's descendants. Universal blessing. The final part of the verse states that through Isaac's seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. This part of the promise points forward to the coming of Jesus Christ, who would be a descendant of Isaac through the line of Abraham. Jesus would be the ultimate blessing for all nations by providing salvation through his life, death, and resurrection. The verse highlights God's faithfulness to fulfill his promises. Despite the challenges Isaac faces, God assures him that his descendants will be numerous, possess the land, and be a source of blessing to the world. It is a reminder that God's plans and purposes extend beyond individual circumstances and generations. This verse also carries significance beyond Isaac's immediate context. It foreshadows the fulfillment of the promise of blessing through Jesus Christ, who would come from Isaac's lineage. In the New Testament, Galatians chapter 3 verse 16 affirms this connection by stating, "Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ." Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 4 underscores the enduring nature of God's covenant, his faithfulness to fulfill his promises, and the ultimate blessing that would come through Jesus Christ. Genesis chapter 26 verse 5. "Because that Abraham obeyed my voice, and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." This verse is part of a larger passage describing God's covenant with Isaac, the son of Abraham. Let's delve into this verse and its significance within the biblical context. In Genesis chapter 26, we find Isaac facing a similar situation to his father Abraham. Due to a famine in the land, Isaac considers going to Egypt for sustenance. However, God appears to Isaac and instructs him not to go down to Egypt but to stay in the land that God will show him. In verse 5, God affirms the reason why he is blessing Isaac and reiterates the promises made to Abraham. Obedience and faithfulness. The verse begins by highlighting the obedience and faithfulness of Abraham. God acknowledges that Abraham obeyed his voice, kept his charge, commandments, statutes, and laws. Abraham's obedience was a significant factor in God's covenantal relationship with him. It demonstrated his trust in God's guidance and revealed his loyalty to God's instructions. As a result, God blessed Abraham abundantly. The covenant relationship. The verse implies a continuation of the covenantal promises made to Abraham. By emphasizing Abraham's faithfulness, God reaffirms his commitment to bless Isaac, the next generation of Abraham's lineage. This verse underscores the significance of obedience and faithfulness in maintaining a covenantal relationship with God. Observance of God's laws. The verse mentions Abraham's adherence to God's charge, commandments, statutes, and laws. Although specific details about these laws are not provided, it implies that Abraham followed God's instructions and lived according to his moral and ethical standards. This highlights the importance of righteous living and obedience to God's commands. Genesis chapter 26 verse 5 serves as a reminder that God's blessings are often associated with obedience and faithfulness. The verse echoes the idea that living in alignment with God's will and his laws is essential in establishing and maintaining a covenantal relationship with him. This principle extends beyond the context of Isaac and Abraham, emphasizing the timeless truth that God desires obedience and loyalty from his people. By studying this verse, we can reflect on our own lives and consider the significance of obedience to God's voice and adherence to his commandments. It encourages us to remain faithful, trust in God's guidance, and seek to live according to his righteous standards. Genesis chapter 26 verse 6. And Isaac dwelt in Gerar. Context. To understand the significance of Genesis chapter 26 verse 6, it's important to look at the surrounding verses and the broader context of the book of Genesis. In Genesis chapter 26, we find the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham, facing a famine in the land. Like his father before him, Isaac goes to Gerar, a Philistine city, seeking sustenance and safety for his family. Historical background: the Philistines were a group of people who inhabited the coastal region of Canaan during the time of the patriarchs. Gerar was one of their principal cities. Isaac's decision to go to Gerar was influenced by the famine, but it also reflected a pattern of interaction between the patriarchs and the Philistines in their journeys. Isaac's sojourn in Gerar. Isaac's dwelling in Gerar was not merely a temporary stop, but a prolonged stay. The subsequent verses describe his experiences while in Gerar, including encounters with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and conflicts over Isaac's wife, Rebekah. Lessons and themes. While Genesis chapter 26 verse 6 itself is a brief statement, it sets the stage for the events that follow in the narrative. This passage highlights several important themes and lessons. God's provision and protection. Just as God provided for Abraham during the famine, Genesis chapter 12, chapter 10, he also cared for Isaac and his family in Gerar. Despite the challenging circumstances, God ensured their well-being and safety. The testing of faith. Isaac's decision to dwell in Gerar, a foreign land with a different culture and potentially hostile people, required trust in God. It tested his faith as he navigated unfamiliar territory. Similarly, believers today are called to trust in God's guidance, even when facing uncertainties or difficult situations. God's faithfulness to his promises. Isaac's presence in Gerar reaffirms God's covenant promises to Abraham and Isaac's inclusion in those promises. God's faithfulness to his covenant extended to the next generation. Interaction with foreign nations. The encounter between Isaac and the Philistines in Gerar reveals the challenges and dynamics of interaction between God's chosen people and neighboring nations. This theme is further developed throughout the book of Genesis and has implications for future events in biblical history. Application. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 26 verse 6, we can draw practical lessons for our lives. Trusting God's provision. Just as Isaac relied on God's provision in Gerar, we can trust that God will provide for us in our times of need. He is our faithful provider, and we can seek His guidance and provision with confidence. Faith in unfamiliar circumstances. Like Isaac, we may find ourselves in unfamiliar situations or places. In such times, we need to lean on our faith, knowing that God is with us and will guide us through the challenges we face. Faithfulness to God's promises. Isaac's presence in Gerar reminds us of the importance of being faithful to God's promises and embracing our role in His plans. As God's people, we are called to live in accordance with His principles and trust in His promises. Engaging with others. The interactions between Isaac and the Philistines teach us about navigating relationships with people from different backgrounds and cultures. We should seek to live as representatives of God's love and grace, being mindful of our conduct and character in all interactions. Remember that studying the Bible involves exploring various interpretations, historical contexts, and theological perspectives. It is often helpful to consult commentaries, study guides, and engage in discussions with fellow believers to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the passage. Genesis chapter 26 verse 7. And the men of the place asked him of his wife. And he said, She is my sister. For he feared to say, She is my wife, lest, said he, the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she was fair to look upon. Historical context. Genesis chapter 26 recounts the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his journey to Gerar during a time of famine. This verse takes place in Gerar, where Isaac and his wife, Rebekah, faced a challenging situation. Fear-driven deception. In this verse, Isaac deceives the men of Gerar by saying that Rebekah is his sister, not his wife. This act stems from Isaac's fear of being killed due to Rebekah's beauty. Isaac believed that if the men of Gerar knew she was his wife, they might harm him to take her for themselves. Parallel with Abraham. This incident mirrors a similar event that occurred earlier in Abraham's life. In Genesis chapter 20, Abraham, Isaac's father, also deceived Abimelech, the king of Gerar, by claiming that his wife, Sarah, was his sister. Both Isaac and Abraham resorted to this deceptive tactic out of fear for their own lives. Faith and trust. Isaac's actions in this verse reveal a lack of trust in God's protection. Despite God's promises to Isaac, he chose to rely on his own schemes to preserve his life. This incident demonstrates Isaac's need for growth in his faith and reliance on God's provision and protection. God's providence. Although Isaac's deceit could have led to severe consequences, God's providence is evident throughout this story. In the subsequent verses, God intervenes to protect Isaac and Rebekah, ensuring their safety and blessing in the land of Gerar. Lessons for believers. This passage reminds believers of the importance of trust in God's faithfulness, even in challenging circumstances. It highlights the negative consequences of resorting to deceit and self-reliance instead of trusting in God's promises and protection. Application. As Christians, we are called to walk in integrity and trust in God's provision, even when faced with difficult situations. Instead of relying on our own plans or resorting to deceit, we should seek God's guidance, trust in His faithfulness, and rely on His protection. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 7 illustrates Isaac's fear-driven deception in claiming Rebekah as his sister instead of his wife. This passage serves as a reminder of the importance of trust in God's provision and protection, while cautioning against relying on deceit and self-reliance. It also highlights God's providential care for His people, even in challenging circumstances. Genesis chapter 26 verse 8. And it came to pass, when he had been there a long time, that Abimelech king of the Philistines looked out at a window, and saw, and, behold, Isaac was sporting with Rebekah his wife. Genesis chapter 26 verse 8 describes an incident involving Isaac and his wife Rebekah during their stay in Gerar. To understand the context and significance of this verse, let's explore the surrounding passages. In Genesis chapter 26, we find that Isaac, the son of Abraham, faced a severe famine in the land, similar to what his father had experienced. In response, Isaac decided to go to Gerar, a city ruled by Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. However, out of fear, Isaac introduced Rebekah as his sister rather than his wife, following in the footsteps of his father Abraham. Isaac's actions raised questions about his relationship with Rebekah, leading Abimelech to observe their behavior through a window. The term sporting used in this verse has led to different interpretations and debates among biblical scholars. Some scholars argue that sporting suggests a display of affection or intimacy between Isaac and Rebekah. It could imply that they were engaged in a loving and playful interaction, which Abimelech noticed and found indicative of their true marital relationship. Others interpret sporting as a euphemism for sexual activity. According to this view, Abimelech observed Isaac and Rebekah engaging in intimate behavior, suggesting that their relationship went beyond the bounds of brother and sister. Regardless of the exact nature of their interaction, it is important to note that Abimelech's observation confirmed Isaac and Rebekah's deception. Later in the chapter, Abimelech confronts Isaac about Rebekah's true identity, and Isaac admits that he lied out of fear for his life. Abimelech reprimands Isaac, emphasizing the potential danger that could have arisen if someone had unwittingly taken Rebekah as a wife. Genesis chapter 26 verse 8 serves as a reminder of the consequences that can arise from deceit and the importance of honesty and integrity. It also highlights the providential protection of God, as Abimelech discovered the truth before any serious harm was done. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 8 captures a moment when Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, observed Isaac and Rebekah's behavior and realized they were not siblings but husband and wife. This verse emphasizes the significance of truthfulness and serves as a lesson on the potential consequences of deception. Genesis chapter 26 verse 9. And Abimelech called Isaac, and said, Behold, of a surety she is thy wife. And how sayest thou, "She is my sister." And Isaac said unto him, "Because I said, lest I die for her." This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac's journey to Gerar during a time of famine. It mirrors a similar incident that occurred with his father, Abraham, and King Abimelech. Chapter 20 verse 0. Let's explore the context and the lessons we can learn from this passage. Historical context: Isaac, like his father, Abraham, faced a famine in the land of Canaan. Instead of going to Egypt, as his father did, Isaac was instructed by God to stay in the land and not to go down to Egypt. Isaac obeyed the Lord and settled in Gerar, a city of the Philistines. Abimelech's rebuke: while in Gerar, Isaac became concerned about his own safety because his wife, Rebekah, was attractive. Fearing that the Philistines might kill him to take Rebekah, Isaac told the people that Rebekah was his sister, just as Abraham had done years before. However, Abimelech discovered the truth and confronted Isaac about the deception. Isaac's explanation: when Abimelech confronted Isaac, he asked him why he had lied, declaring that Rebekah was undoubtedly his wife. Isaac's response was simple: "Because I said, lest I die for her." Isaac's fear for his own life caused him to resort to deception. Lessons from the passage: the consequences of deception. Isaac's attempt to deceive Abimelech not only put his own integrity at stake, but also jeopardized the well-being of the people around him. Deception can have serious consequences, leading to broken trust and damaged relationships. God's protection and promises. Isaac's fear was unfounded. God had already promised to bless him and make his descendants as numerous as the stars. Chapter 26 verses 3 and 4. If Isaac had trusted in God's promises, he would not have resorted to deception. We are reminded to have faith in God's provision and protection, even in difficult situations. Learning from family mistakes. Isaac had witnessed his father, Abraham, make a similar mistake in lying about his wife, Sarah. Instead of learning from his father's error, Isaac repeated it. This passage serves as a reminder that we should learn from the mistakes of others and strive to avoid repeating them. The importance of honesty and integrity. Isaac's deception highlights the importance of honesty and integrity in our lives. As believers, we are called to speak the truth and act with integrity, even in challenging circumstances. Application: trust in God's promises. When faced with difficult situations, trust in God's promises and seek His guidance rather than resorting to deception or questionable actions. Learning from family mistakes. Reflect on the mistakes and shortcomings of our ancestors and make a conscious effort to learn from them. Let their experiences serve as lessons for our own lives. Cultivating honesty and integrity. Strive to be a person of integrity, upholding the values of honesty and truthfulness in all aspects of life, even when faced with challenging circumstances. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 9 teaches us important lessons about the consequences of deception, the need to trust in God's promises, learning from family mistakes, and the significance of honesty and integrity in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 10. And Abimelech said, "What is this thou hast done unto us? One of the people might lightly have lain with thy wife, and thou shouldest have brought guiltiness upon us." This verse is a part of the narrative about Isaac, the son of Abraham, during his time in Gerar. It follows the account of Isaac deceiving the people of Gerar by presenting his wife, Rebekah, as his sister out of fear for his life. In doing so, Isaac hoped to protect himself from potential harm, as his father Abraham had done before him. Genesis chapter 12 verses 10 through 20. In this verse, Abimelech, the king of Gerar, confronts Isaac after discovering the truth. Abimelech expresses his concern over Isaac's actions, questioning why Isaac had put both himself and the people of Gerar at risk. Abimelech suggests that if one of his people had slept with Rebekah, Isaac's wife, it would have resulted in guilt and wrongdoing on Isaac's part, affecting the entire community. This incident highlights several important aspects that we can consider. Consequences of deception. Isaac's attempt to deceive the people of Gerar by presenting his wife as his sister ultimately proved unsuccessful. This event serves as a reminder of the consequences that can arise from dishonesty. Although Isaac had genuine concerns for his safety, his deceit jeopardized the trust and well-being of those around him. Protection of marriage. Abimelech's rebuke reveals the seriousness of the offense committed against the sanctity of marriage. The potential violation of Isaac's marital covenant would have brought guilt upon both Isaac and the people of Gerar. This incident emphasizes the importance of upholding the sacredness and faithfulness of the marriage relationship. Lessons on trusting God. Isaac's actions in this account also reveal a lack of trust in God's ability to protect him. Despite God's promise to bless and protect Isaac, Genesis chapter 26 verses 3 through 4, Isaac succumbed to fear and took matters into his own hands. This serves as a reminder to us that, as believers, we should trust in God's faithfulness and rely on His promises, rather than resorting to deceit or manipulation. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 10 presents a cautionary tale of the consequences of deception and the importance of upholding the sanctity of marriage. It also serves as a reminder to trust in God's protection and faithfulness in all circumstances. Genesis chapter 26 verse 11. And Abimelech charged all his people, saying, He that toucheth this man or his wife shall surely be put to death. In this verse, we find Abimelech, the king of Gerar, speaking to his people about Isaac and his wife Rebekah. To better understand the significance of this verse, let's examine the context and explore the key themes and lessons that can be derived from it. Context. In Genesis chapter 26, we read about Isaac, the son of Abraham, facing a situation similar to one his father encountered. Due to a severe famine, Isaac went to Gerar, where Abimelech ruled, seeking sustenance for himself and his family. However, fearing for his life, Isaac initially introduced Rebekah as his sister, just as Abraham had done with Sarah in the past. Eventually, Abimelech discovered the truth and confronted Isaac about his deception. Interestingly, instead of punishing or expelling Isaac, Abimelech showed him favor and respect. Abimelech even warned his people not to harm Isaac or his wife, under the penalty of death. Themes and lessons. God's protection. Despite Isaac's initial dishonesty, God intervened and protected him and his wife. Abimelech's warning to his people highlights God's sovereign control over the circumstances, ensuring Isaac's safety and well-being. It underscores the principle that God can use even imperfect individuals to fulfill His plans and provide divine protection. Respect for marriage. Abimelech's charge to his people emphasizes the sacredness of marriage and the need to honor the marital bond. By warning against touching Isaac or Rebekah, Abimelech acknowledged the significance of the covenant relationship between a husband and wife. This serves as a reminder of the importance of fidelity, trust, and respect within the institution of marriage. God's faithfulness. The encounter between Isaac, Abimelech, and Rebekah echoes similar incidents involving Abraham and Sarah. Despite their human flaws, God remained faithful to His promises and protected them in foreign lands. This reiterates God's unwavering faithfulness to His chosen people and His willingness to intervene in their lives. Consequences of disobedience. Abimelech's stern warning about the penalty of death for touching Isaac or his wife signifies the severe consequences of disobedience. It serves as a deterrent, emphasizing the importance of respecting God's chosen servants and their families. Additionally, it highlights Abimelech's recognition of Isaac's significance and the potential repercussions of harming him or his wife. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 11 portrays the divine protection and faithfulness of God, the significance of marriage, and the potential consequences of disobedience. It provides lessons about trust, integrity, and the need to honor and respect God's chosen servants and their families. Genesis chapter 26 verse 12. Then Isaac sowed in that land, and received in the same year an hundredfold, and the Lord blessed him. Context. In Genesis chapter 26, we find the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham, during a time of famine. Isaac went to Gerar, where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, was ruling. Fearing for his life, Isaac lied to Abimelech, saying that his wife Rebekah was his sister. God, however, protected Isaac and Rebekah, and Abimelech eventually discovered the truth. Isaac's faith and obedience. Despite the difficult circumstances, Isaac demonstrated faith and obedience by sowing in the land. This act of sowing is significant because it required faith in God's provision and a willingness to invest in the midst of scarcity. Isaac's action shows that he trusted in God's promises, even when circumstances were challenging. God's faithfulness and blessing. In response to Isaac's obedience, God blessed him abundantly. Isaac received 100-fold return on his sowing in the same year. This miraculous harvest surpassed all natural expectations and was a clear manifestation of God's favor and provision. It demonstrated God's faithfulness to fulfill his promises to Isaac and his ancestors, specifically the promise of blessings mentioned in Genesis chapter 26 verses 3 through 5. Spiritual lessons. Trust in God's promises. Isaac's story teaches us the importance of trusting in God's promises, even in difficult times. Despite the famine and surrounding challenges, Isaac believed that God would provide for him and his family. Obedience in adversity. Isaac's obedience to sow in the land encourages us to remain faithful to God's commands even when circumstances seem unfavorable. God often rewards our obedience with blessings, but we need to trust and obey Him first. God's provision and abundance. This verse highlights God's ability to provide abundantly beyond our expectations. It reminds us that God is not limited by natural circumstances, and He can bless us even in the midst of scarcity. Honesty and integrity. Although Isaac initially lied about his relationship with Rebekah, this passage also shows the importance of honesty and integrity. Eventually, the truth was revealed, and Isaac's dishonesty was exposed. As followers of God, we should strive to be people of truth and integrity in all our dealings. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 12 teaches us valuable lessons about faith, obedience, God's faithfulness, and His ability to provide abundantly. It encourages us to trust in God's promises, obey His commands, and live with honesty and integrity. Genesis chapter 26 verse 13. And the man waxed great, and went forward, and grew until he became very great. Context: Genesis chapter 26 records the life of Isaac, the son of Abraham. In this particular verse, we find Isaac prospering in the land of Gerar despite facing opposition and challenges. This verse follows the account of Isaac's conflicts over wells with the people of Gerar and his eventual victory. God's promise. In Genesis chapter 26 verses 3 through 4, God reaffirms the covenant He made with Abraham and extends it to Isaac. God promises to bless Isaac, make his descendants numerous, and give them the land. This promise is part of God's faithfulness to fulfill His covenant. Isaac's faithfulness. Throughout the narrative, Isaac demonstrates faithfulness to God and follows in the footsteps of his father Abraham. Despite encountering difficulties and the need to move from place to place, Isaac remains obedient to God's instructions and relies on Him for guidance and provision. God's blessing. In Genesis chapter 26 verse 12, the passage preceding verse 13, it is stated that Isaac sowed in the land and reaped 100-fold in the same year. The immediate context highlights Isaac's agricultural prosperity. However, the phrase, "the man waxed great," in verse 13 suggests that Isaac's blessing extended beyond material wealth. Spiritual growth. The phrase, "went forward," and grew until he became very great, implies Isaac's continuous growth and advancement. This growth encompasses not only physical prosperity but also spiritual maturity. As Isaac faithfully followed God, his character and influence expanded, making him great in the eyes of the people around him. Lessons for believers. Faithfulness in obedience. Isaac's story encourages believers to remain faithful and obedient to God's commands, even in challenging circumstances. God rewards those who trust and obey Him. God's provision and blessing. Isaac's prosperity reminds us that God is the source of all blessings and that He can bring abundance into our lives, both materially and spiritually. Spiritual growth and influence. As we walk in faith and trust in God, our lives can have a positive impact on those around us. Our growth in character and faith can lead to increased influence and opportunities to glorify God. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 13 portrays Isaac's journey of faith, obedience, and prosperity. It reminds us of God's faithfulness, the importance of remaining obedient, and the potential for spiritual growth and influence in our lives as we trust in Him. Genesis chapter 26 verse 14. And he had possession of flocks, and possession of herds, and great store of servants, and the Philistines envied him. Context: Genesis chapter 26 verses 2 through 5 takes place during a time when Isaac, the son of Abraham, faced a famine in the land of Gerar. In response to this difficult situation, Isaac sought the Lord's guidance and received a promise from God to bless him in the land where he was residing. Despite the famine, Isaac prospered abundantly in terms of possessing flocks, herds, and servants. Possession of flocks and herds. The verse highlights Isaac's possession of flocks and herds. In ancient times, livestock were considered a sign of wealth and prosperity. Isaac's possession of flocks and herds indicates that God's blessing and favor were upon him even in the midst of the famine. This demonstrates God's faithfulness in fulfilling His promise to bless Isaac. Great store of servants. Along with possessing flocks and herds, Isaac had a significant number of servants. This suggests that Isaac's prosperity extended beyond his material possessions. He had a household that was well staffed and able to support his growing wealth. This aspect emphasizes the extent of Isaac's prosperity and the favor he experienced. Philistines envy. The verse concludes by stating that the Philistines envied Isaac. The Philistines were a neighboring people who witnessed Isaac's prosperity despite the famine. Envy arose within him as they observed Isaac's blessings and success. This envy was likely fueled by their own lack during the famine. Lessons and application. Genesis chapter 26 verse 14 teaches us several valuable lessons. God's faithfulness. Isaac's story reminds us that God remains faithful to His promises even in challenging circumstances. He blessed Isaac abundantly despite the famine, showing that His provision knows no limitations. The impact of God's blessing. Isaac's prosperity drew the envy of others. As believers, we should be mindful that God's blessings may not always be received positively by everyone around us. Nevertheless, we should continue to walk in integrity, trusting in God's provision. Contentment and gratitude. Isaac's story encourages us to be content and grateful for the blessings God has bestowed upon us. Rather than being envious of others, we should focus on expressing gratitude to God for His faithfulness in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 15. For all the wells which his father's servants had digged in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines had stopped them, and filled them with earth. Context: in Genesis chapter 26, we find the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, facing a famine in the land of Canaan. Isaac, following the Lord's command, goes to Gerar, where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, reigns. In this verse, we see Isaac encountering opposition from the Philistines regarding the wells that his father's servants had previously dug. Wells as a symbol. Wells held great significance in the ancient world, especially in dry regions like Canaan. They were crucial for survival, providing water for people, livestock, and crops. In the Bible, wells often symbolize blessing, prosperity, and the divine presence. They also represent the source of life, both physically and spiritually. Philistine opposition. In the verse, we see that the Philistines stopped up and filled with earth the wells that Abraham's servants had dug. This action by the Philistines can be seen as a deliberate act to hinder Isaac's prosperity and limit his access to water, thus exerting control over him and his household. Spiritual implications. Beyond the literal sense, this verse holds spiritual lessons. The Philistines can represent the world and its opposition to God's people. The filling of the wells may symbolize attempts to obstruct or block the blessings and provision of God in our lives. It reminds us that the world may seek to hinder our spiritual growth, prosperity, and access to the life-giving waters of God's Word and His presence. Perseverance and resilience. Isaac's response to the Philistines' actions teaches us important lessons. In the subsequent verses, we see Isaac demonstrating resilience and perseverance. He did not give up but continued to dig new wells, facing opposition each time until he found one that the Philistines did not dispute. Genesis chapter 26 verses 16 through 22. Isaac's determination teaches us the value of persistence and trust in God's faithfulness, even in the face of adversity. Application. As believers, we may encounter obstacles and opposition in our journey of faith. This verse reminds us not to be discouraged by the challenges that come our way. Instead, we should remain steadfast, relying on God's guidance and provision. Like Isaac, we need to be persistent in pursuing God's blessings and His Word, even when the world tries to obstruct our progress. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 15 highlights the Philistines' opposition to Isaac by filling the wells his father's servants had dug. Beyond the literal account, this verse encourages us to persevere in the face of opposition and obstacles, trusting in God's faithfulness to provide and bless us. It serves as a reminder that even when the world tries to hinder us, we can find strength and provision by remaining faithful to God. Genesis chapter 26 verse 16. Then Abimelech said unto Isaac, Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we. This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac's life in the book of Genesis. To better understand the context and significance of this verse, let's explore the surrounding passages. In Genesis chapter 26, we find that Isaac, the son of Abraham, was living in the land of Gerar during a time of famine. In an attempt to secure food for himself and his family, Isaac deceived the people of Gerar by presenting his wife, Rebekah, as his sister. Isaac feared that the people would kill him to take Rebekah because she was beautiful. However, his deception was soon discovered when Abimelech, the king of Gerar, looked out of his window and saw Isaac caressing Rebekah. Perceiving that Isaac had lied about Rebekah's true identity, Abimelech confronted him. Now, coming to Genesis chapter 26 verse 16, Abimelech responds to the situation by telling Isaac, Go from us, for thou art much mightier than we. Abimelech's statement reflects a mixture of respect and fear. He acknowledges that Isaac is more powerful and blessed by God, which leads him to ask Isaac to leave. The significance of this verse lies in the underlying theme of God's faithfulness to His covenant promises. Despite Isaac's fear and deception, God protected him and eventually revealed the truth to Abimelech. Abimelech recognized the divine favor upon Isaac, and his acknowledgement of Isaac's mightiness reveals the fulfillment of God's promise to bless Isaac abundantly. Additionally, this passage provides a lesson about the consequences of deception. Isaac's attempt to deceive others not only put him in a difficult situation but also disrupted his relationship with the people of Gerar. The subsequent events show that honesty and trustworthiness are essential in our interactions with others. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 16 showcases Abimelech's recognition of Isaac's might and blessing, leading him to request Isaac's departure from Gerar. This verse demonstrates God's faithfulness to His promises and highlights the importance of honesty and trust in our relationships. Genesis chapter 26 verse 17. And Isaac departed thence, and pitched his tent in the valley of Gerar, and dwelt there. Context. To better understand this verse, it's important to consider its context. In Genesis chapter 26, we find the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham, facing a famine in the land. God instructs Isaac not to go down to Egypt but to stay in the land of Canaan. Isaac obeys and settles in Gerar. Isaac's departure. The verse begins with Isaac departing from a certain place. Previously, Isaac had settled in Beersheba, Genesis chapter 26 verse 6, but due to the famine, he leaves that place. This highlights Isaac's obedience to God's guidance to stay in the land. The valley of Gerar. Isaac pitches his tent in the valley of Gerar. Gerar was a region in the land of Canaan, located southwest of Beersheba. The choice of settling in the valley indicates that Isaac sought a fertile place to sustain himself and his family during the famine. Dwell in Gerar. Isaac dwelt in Gerar, which means he lived there for a period of time. This suggests that Isaac intended to establish a temporary residence in Gerar until the famine subsided. Spiritual lessons. Obedience to God. Isaac's departure from one place to another demonstrates his obedience to God's guidance. As believers, we should trust and follow God's leading even when faced with challenging circumstances. Trusting God's provision. Isaac's decision to settle in the valley of Gerar indicates his reliance on God's provision. Despite the famine, Isaac trusted that God would sustain him and his family. This teaches us to depend on God's faithfulness and trust that He will meet our needs. Fleeing temptation. Gerar was also the land of the Philistines, a people known for their idolatry and godlessness. Isaac's choice to dwell in Gerar serves as a reminder to be cautious when living among those whose values and practices may lead us away from God. It emphasizes the importance of maintaining our faith and integrity even in challenging environments. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 17 highlights Isaac's obedience to God's guidance and his trust in God's provision. It encourages us to rely on God and seek His will even in difficult circumstances, reminding us of the faithfulness of God in fulfilling His promises. Genesis chapter 26 verse 18. And Isaac digged again the wells of water, which they had digged in the days of Abraham his father, for the Philistines had stopped them after the death of Abraham, and he called their names after the names by which his father had called them. Genesis chapter 26 verse 18 recounts an episode from the life of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Let's explore the significance of this verse and its broader context. Historical context. At this point in the narrative, Isaac was residing in the land of Gerar during a time of famine. Isaac faced a similar situation as his father, Abraham, had faced in the past. However, instead of going down to Egypt, as Abraham did, God instructed Isaac to remain in the land and reaffirmed His covenant with him. Genesis chapter 26 verses 1 through 5. Restoring the wells. In this verse, we learn that Isaac redug the wells his father Abraham had previously dug. These wells were a valuable source of water for the people and their livestock. The Philistines had filled these wells with dirt after Abraham's death, likely as an act of hostility or to assert their control over the resources in the region. Isaac's action of reopening these wells demonstrates his determination to reclaim the blessings and inheritance of his father. He wanted to ensure that his family had access to the same resources and provisions that Abraham had enjoyed. It also reflects Isaac's faithfulness to God's promises and his willingness to honor his father's legacy. Naming the wells, Isaac not only redug the wells but also gave them the same names his father had given them. By doing so, he acknowledged the historical significance and importance of those wells in the lives of his ancestors. The names served as a link to the past and a reminder of the faithfulness of God to Abraham. Symbolism and application. The act of reopening the wells can be seen as a metaphorical representation of the restoration of blessings, favor, and spiritual vitality. Isaac's actions teach us several valuable lessons. Persistence and diligence. Isaac's determination to restore the wells serves as an example of perseverance in the face of adversity. He didn't allow the Philistines' opposition to deter him from pursuing God's promises. Likewise, in our own lives, we should persist in our faith and continue to seek God's blessings, even when faced with challenges or opposition. Honoring our spiritual heritage. Isaac's decision to call the wells by the same names as his father demonstrates respect for his family's spiritual heritage. Similarly, we should value and appreciate the spiritual legacy passed down to us by our ancestors, both in our biological families and in the broader family of faith. Faithfulness to God's promises. Isaac's actions show his faith in the promises God made to Abraham. By reclaiming the wells, he affirmed his belief that God's covenant blessings would extend to future generations. As believers today, we can trust in God's promises and faithfully follow His guidance, knowing that He will fulfill His word in our lives. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 18 highlights Isaac's commitment to restore the wells his father had dug, symbolizing his determination to claim God's blessings and honor his family's legacy. This passage encourages us to be persistent, honor our spiritual heritage, and trust in God's faithfulness to his promises. Genesis chapter 26 verse 19. And Isaac's servants dug in the valley, and found there a well of springing water. Context: Genesis chapter 26 tells the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his experiences in the land of Gerar during a time of famine. Isaac follows in the footsteps of his father and settles in Gerar. As he begins to prosper, the Philistines become envious and stop up all the wells that Abraham had dug. Isaac, facing opposition, redigs the wells and finds a well of springing water. Historical significance: water was essential for survival in the arid regions of the ancient Near East. Wells provided a reliable source of water for people and their livestock. The Philistines' act of stopping up the wells was an aggressive move aimed at undermining Isaac's prosperity and making it difficult for him to thrive in the land. Symbolism and spiritual lessons. Spiritual opposition. Isaac's experience of the Philistines stopping up the wells can symbolize the opposition that believers often face in their spiritual journey. Just as Isaac faced resistance in accessing water, Christians may encounter obstacles and opposition as they seek to draw from the wells of spiritual sustenance. These obstacles can come in the form of persecution, doubt, temptation, or societal pressures. Persistence and faith. Isaac's response to the Philistines' actions is significant. Instead of giving up, he perseveres and redigs the wells. This demonstrates the importance of persistence and faith in the face of adversity. As believers, we should not be discouraged by the opposition we encounter but remain steadfast in our pursuit of spiritual nourishment. Rediscovering God's provision. The discovery of a well of springing water by Isaac's servants highlights God's provision in the midst of challenges. Isaac's diligence and determination to redig the wells led to the uncovering of a new source of water. Similarly, when we persevere in our spiritual walk, God often reveals His abundant provision and blessings that were previously hidden from us. Application. Trust God's provision. When we encounter opposition or challenges, we must remember that God is our ultimate provider. Like Isaac, we should trust in God's faithfulness to meet our needs, even in difficult circumstances. He can provide for us in unexpected ways and open new doors of blessing. Persevere in faith. When faced with obstacles, we should not lose heart but persevere in our faith. Just as Isaac redug the wells, we should be willing to put in the effort and remain steadfast in pursuing God's blessings. Our diligence and faithfulness will often lead to breakthroughs and the discovery of God's abundant provision. Embrace spiritual nourishment. As believers, we need to continually seek spiritual nourishment by digging into God's Word, spending time in prayer, and engaging in fellowship with other believers. Despite the opposition we may face, we can find refreshing and life-giving water from the wells of God's presence and truth. Remember, the story of Isaac and the well of springing water in Genesis chapter 26 verse 19 not only teaches us about the historical events but also provides valuable spiritual lessons. By trusting God, persevering in faith, and seeking spiritual nourishment, we can overcome obstacles and experience His abundant provision in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 20. And the herdmen of Gerar did strive with Isaac's herdmen, saying, The water is ours. And he called the name of the well Esek, because they strove with him. In this verse, we find Isaac, the son of Abraham, facing a dispute with the herdmen of Gerar over water rights. To better understand the significance of this verse, let's explore its context and the broader themes within the book of Genesis. Genesis is the first book of the Bible and provides an account of the origins of the world, humanity, and God's covenant relationship with His chosen people. It presents stories of various individuals, including Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who play vital roles in the unfolding plan of God. In Genesis chapter 26, we see Isaac following in the footsteps of his father, Abraham. Due to a famine, Isaac moves to Gerar, a Philistine territory ruled by Abimelech. In verse 1, it says that Isaac went to Abimelech because God instructed him not to go down to Egypt but to dwell in the land that God would show him. This highlights Isaac's faithfulness to God's guidance and his desire to obey God's will. As Isaac settles in Gerar, he faces a similar challenge to what his father had faced years earlier. Like Abraham, he finds himself in contention with the people of the land, specifically over water resources. The herdsmen of Gerar quarrel with Isaac's herdsmen, claiming the water as their own. This conflict leads Isaac to name the well, Esek, which means contention, or strife, to commemorate the dispute. This incident raises a few notable points for reflection. The importance of water. Water was a precious and vital resource in the arid regions of the Middle East. Wells provided access to water, making them valuable assets for both human survival and livestock. Isaac's reliance on wells demonstrates the significance of water in sustaining life and livelihood. The theme of contention. The name Esek captures the spirit of conflict and strife between Isaac's herdsmen and those of Gerar. It serves as a reminder of the disputes and challenges encountered when living among others who may not share the same values or interests. Isaac's response to the conflict shows his commitment to maintaining peace and resolving disputes amicably. Divine guidance and blessings. Throughout the narrative, we witness God's presence and guidance in Isaac's life. Despite the challenges, Isaac remains faithful to God's leading. Later in Genesis chapter 26, God reaffirms his covenant with Isaac, promising to bless him and multiply his descendants. This episode emphasizes the importance of seeking and trusting in God's guidance during difficult times. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 26 verse 20, we can learn from Isaac's example of navigating disputes and conflicts in a manner that upholds peace and seeks resolution. Furthermore, we are reminded of the significance of relying on God's guidance in our lives and trusting in His promises, even amidst challenging circumstances. Genesis chapter 26 verse 21. And they digged another well, and strove for that also, and he called the name of it Sitnah. This verse is part of the narrative concerning Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his dealings with the Philistines. Let's delve into the context and significance of Genesis chapter 26 verse 21. In Genesis chapter 26, we find Isaac encountering difficulties as he seeks to find water in the land of Gerar, where the Philistines reside. As Isaac's father, Abraham, had done before him, Isaac also faced a similar situation of having his wells seized by the Philistines. In Genesis chapter 26 verses 18 and 19, we read that Isaac reopened the wells his father had dug, but the Philistines claimed them as their own. So, Isaac moved on and dug another well. This new well is the subject of Genesis chapter 26 verse 21, where we learn that Isaac and his servants encountered strife or contention in their efforts to secure water from this newly dug well. Isaac named this well Sitnah, which means enmity or hostility in Hebrew. The naming of the well reflects the ongoing conflicts and disputes between Isaac's group and the Philistines over the access to resources like water. The Philistines' actions were driven by a desire to control the valuable resource of water, and they engaged in aggressive behavior to hinder Isaac's progress. It is worth noting that Isaac's response to the strife was not retaliatory but marked by perseverance. In the subsequent verses, Isaac and his servants continue to dig additional wells despite facing opposition. This persistence ultimately leads to the discovery of a well where they face no contention, named Rehoboth, which means spaciousness or room. In Genesis chapter 26 verse 22, Isaac explains that God has made room for them, blessing them to flourish and multiply in that land. The events described in Genesis chapter 26 verse 21 illustrate a larger theme found throughout the Bible, namely, the struggle between God's people and the forces that oppose them. This struggle often involves both physical and spiritual battles, as individuals face various challenges in their journey of faith. In the case of Isaac, the story demonstrates the importance of perseverance, trust in God's provision, and the ultimate victory that comes through faithfulness. By studying Genesis chapter 26 verse 21 in the broader context of Isaac's encounters with the Philistines, we can draw lessons of resilience, reliance on God, and the ultimate fulfillment of His promises even in the face of adversity. Genesis chapter 26 verse 22. And he removed from thence, and digged another well. And for that they strove not, and he called the name of it Rehoboth. And he said, For now the Lord hath made room for us, and we shall be fruitful in the land. This verse is part of the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham, in the book of Genesis. Let's explore its context and meaning. Context. In Genesis chapter 26, we find Isaac living in the land of Gerar during a time of famine. Isaac, like his father Abraham, faces a situation where the Philistines, the people of the land, envy and oppose him due to his prosperity and the blessings of God upon him. Isaac initially settles in Gerar, where he follows in his father's footsteps by passing off his wife Rebekah as his sister, fearing for his life. However, King Abimelech discovers their true relationship, and Isaac receives protection from harm. The digging of the wells. After Isaac's encounter with King Abimelech, the Philistines begin to envy Isaac's growing wealth, particularly his possession of wells. Isaac initially reopens the wells that his father Abraham had dug, but the Philistines argue over them, claiming the wells as their own. So, Isaac decides to move away from the conflict and digs another well, which the Philistines do not contend. The naming of the well and its significance. Upon successfully digging a well without strife, Isaac names it Rehoboth, which means room or spaciousness. In doing so, Isaac acknowledges that the Lord has made room for them in the land. This name represents a shift from conflict and opposition to a place of blessing and provision. It signifies Isaac's recognition of God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of His promises. Spiritual lessons from Genesis chapter 26 verse 22. Faithfulness in adversity. Isaac's story teaches us the importance of remaining faithful to God even in difficult circumstances. Despite facing opposition, Isaac trusted in God's provision and continued seeking a place of blessing. Trusting God's promises. Isaac's belief in God's faithfulness is evident in his acknowledgement of the Lord making room for him. As believers, we can trust that God is faithful to fulfill His promises in our lives, even when faced with challenges or opposition. Seeking peace and avoiding strife. Isaac's decision to move away from the contention over the wells demonstrates wisdom in seeking peace. As Christians, we should strive to live in harmony with others and avoid unnecessary conflict whenever possible. Gratitude for God's provision. Isaac's act of naming the well Rehoboth reveals his gratitude to God for the spaciousness and fruitfulness he experienced. Similarly, we should cultivate a heart of thanksgiving for the blessings God provides us, recognizing that all good things come from Him. Genesis chapter 26 verse 23. And he went up from thence to Beersheba. Context. To understand the significance of this verse, we need to consider the broader context. Genesis chapter 26 tells the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham. Isaac was living in the land of the Philistines during a time of famine. God appeared to Isaac and instructed him not to go down to Egypt but to dwell in the land of Gerar. Isaac obeyed God and settled there. Famine and blessing. In the preceding verses, we learn that Isaac faced a similar situation to his father Abraham. There was a famine in the land, but Isaac didn't go to Egypt as Abraham had done. Instead, he remained in the land of Gerar. This decision to obey God's command demonstrates Isaac's faith and trust in God's provision. Despite the challenging circumstances, Isaac believed that God would bless him and provide for his needs. Beersheba. The verse specifically mentions that Isaac went up from Gerar to Beersheba. Beersheba was a significant location in Isaac's life and in the history of Israel. It was a place where Abraham, Isaac's father, had previously lived. Genesis chapter 21 verse 33. Beersheba held special meaning as a place of covenant and blessing for Isaac's family. By going to Beersheba, Isaac might have been seeking a place of spiritual significance and a connection to his family's heritage. Symbolism. The journey from Gerar to Beersheba can also be seen as symbolic. Gerar was a foreign land where Isaac lived among the Philistines. In contrast, Beersheba was a land associated with his family's covenant relationship with God. Isaac's journey from Gerar to Beersheba can represent his separation from the world and a return to the place of God's blessing and covenant. It symbolizes a renewed commitment to his faith and heritage. Application. Isaac's decision to trust God's guidance and his return to Beersheba teaches us valuable lessons. Firstly, it reminds us to seek God's guidance in all circumstances, even during difficult times. Isaac chose not to take matters into his own hands but instead relied on God's direction. Secondly, it encourages us to prioritize our spiritual heritage and seek connection with our faith community. Just as Beersheba held significance for Isaac, we should value and nurture the spiritual roots that ground us in our relationship with God. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 23 showcases Isaac's obedience to God's command and his journey from Gerar to Beersheba, a place of covenant and blessing. This verse serves as a reminder for us to trust God in challenging times and to seek connection with our spiritual heritage. Genesis chapter 26 verse 24. And the Lord appeared unto him the same night, and said, I am the God of Abraham thy father, fear not, for I am with thee, and will bless thee, and multiply thy seed for my servant Abraham's sake. Historical context. Genesis chapter 26 records the account of Isaac, the son of Abraham and the promised heir of the covenant God made with Abraham. During Isaac's time, there was a severe famine in the land, and Isaac went to Gerar, the land of the Philistines. Fearful for his life, he lied about his wife Rebekah, claiming she was his sister. However, God protected Isaac and blessed him abundantly, as seen in this verse. God's appearance and identity. In Genesis chapter 26 verse 24, the Lord appears to Isaac during the night. The fact that God appeared to Isaac indicates his direct involvement and intervention in Isaac's life. God introduces himself as the God of Abraham thy father, emphasizing the continuity of the covenant promises made to Abraham, which now extend to Isaac. This reassures Isaac and reminds him of his connection to God's chosen people. The divine assurance. The primary message conveyed by God in this verse is one of assurance and encouragement. God tells Isaac, fear not, for I am with thee. Isaac was likely apprehensive and uncertain about his safety and the future during the famine. However, God reassures him that there is no need to fear because the Almighty is by his side. This assurance extends beyond physical protection to encompass divine guidance, provision, and support. Blessings and multiplication. God assures Isaac of his blessing and the multiplication of his offspring. God declares, I will bless thee and multiply thy seed. This promise is significant because it reaffirms the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac's father. God's blessing and multiplication of Isaac's descendants would ensure the fulfillment of the divine plan to form a great nation through Abraham's lineage. Abraham's sake. The verse concludes with the phrase, for my servant Abraham's sake. Here, God indicates that Isaac's blessing and multiplication are connected to the faithfulness and covenant relationship God had with Abraham. God's promise to Abraham extends to Isaac, and the blessings bestowed upon Isaac are a testament to God's faithfulness and commitment to fulfill his covenant promises. Key takeaway. Genesis chapter 26 verse 24 showcases God's faithfulness and his commitment to fulfill his promises to Isaac, as he had done with Abraham. The verse highlights the importance of trust and reliance on God, even in times of uncertainty and difficulty. It serves as a reminder that when we walk in obedience and hold on to the promises of God, He will be with us, bless us, and fulfill His purposes through us. Note: the interpretation and understanding of Bible verses can vary among individuals and denominations. This study provides a general overview and analysis but is not exhaustive. Genesis chapter 26 verse 25. And he builded an altar there, and called upon the name of the Lord, and pitched his tent there, and there Isaac's servants digged a well. This verse is part of the narrative that describes the events in the life of Isaac, the son of Abraham and the father of Jacob. In this particular passage, Isaac has settled in the land of Gerar, and he encounters some opposition from the people of that land. Let's explore the significance of this verse in its context. Building an altar. Isaac, following the example of his father Abraham, builds an altar. In the Old Testament, altars were places of worship and sacrifice where people could come into the presence of God. Altars were typically made of stones and served as a symbol of one's devotion and surrender to God. By building an altar, Isaac demonstrates his faith in God and his desire to worship and seek God's guidance. Calling upon the name of the Lord. When Isaac calls upon the name of the Lord, it signifies his act of prayer and communion with God. By invoking God's name, Isaac acknowledges God's sovereignty and seeks his presence and blessing. This act reveals Isaac's reliance on God for guidance and provision in the midst of challenging circumstances. Pitching his tent. Isaac pitches his tent near the altar he built. In the Bible, tents were often associated with temporary dwelling and nomadic lifestyle. By pitching his tent near the altar, Isaac demonstrates his intention to stay close to the place of worship and to maintain a consistent relationship with God. It signifies his desire to make God the center of his life and his commitment to honor God in all he does. Digging a well. Isaac's servants dig a well at this location. Wells were crucial sources of water in the arid regions of the ancient Near East, and they were essential for survival and sustenance. By digging a well, Isaac ensures the provision of water for himself, his family, and his livestock. It also symbolizes his efforts to establish roots in the land and his commitment to make a life there. The verse portrays Isaac's response to the challenges he faces in a foreign land. Instead of being discouraged or giving in to fear, Isaac chooses to worship, pray, and trust in God's provision. It highlights the importance of maintaining a relationship with God and seeking His guidance even in unfamiliar or difficult circumstances. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 25 teaches us the significance of worship, prayer, and reliance on God in our lives. It encourages us to build an altar in our hearts, call upon the name of the Lord, pitch our tents near His presence, and dig deep wells of faith and trust. By doing so, we can navigate through challenging times and experience God's provision and blessings in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 26. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar, and Rehoboth one of his friends, and Phicol the chief captain of his army. Context. To understand the significance of Genesis chapter 26 verse 26, it's important to consider the broader context of the passage. Genesis chapter 26 recounts the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his experiences in Gerar. Due to a severe famine, Isaac had moved to Gerar, where he faced similar challenges regarding his wife, Rebekah, as his father had experienced concerning his wife, Sarah. Abimelech's visit. In Genesis chapter 26 verse 26, we see that Abimelech, the king of Gerar, visited Isaac. This visit is significant because it demonstrates a change in Abimelech's attitude towards Isaac. Earlier in the chapter, Abimelech had asked Isaac to leave the land because he was growing jealous of Isaac's prosperity. However, after witnessing God's blessing upon Isaac and realizing that Isaac was a chosen instrument of God, Abimelech took the initiative to seek reconciliation. Rehoboth and Phicol. Along with Abimelech, two individuals accompany him in his visit to Isaac. Rehoboth is described as one of Abimelech's friends, and Phicol is referred to as the chief captain of Abimelech's army. Their presence highlights the importance and significance of the visit. Abimelech's decision to bring his friend and chief captain along suggests that this was a formal and significant occasion. Reconciliation and covenant. Abimelech's visit, along with his friend and chief captain, can be seen as a sign of reconciliation and the establishment of a covenant between Isaac and Abimelech. This visit and subsequent interaction between the two parties were likely aimed at solidifying peace, confirming the legitimacy of Isaac's claims to the land, and recognizing God's blessing upon him. Lessons and applications. Genesis chapter 26 verse 26 teaches us several lessons. First, it highlights the importance of reconciliation and seeking peace. Abimelech's willingness to reconcile with Isaac demonstrates the value of resolving conflicts and maintaining peaceful relationships. Second, it reminds us of God's faithfulness and blessings. Despite the challenges faced by Isaac, God remained faithful and continued to bless him abundantly. Personal reflection. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 26 verse 26, we can examine our own lives. Are there any conflicts or strained relationships that require reconciliation? Are we actively seeking peace and unity with others? Additionally, we can appreciate God's faithfulness in our lives, acknowledging His blessings and giving thanks for His provision. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 26 verse 26 portrays the visit of Abimelech, along with his friend Gerar and chief captain Phicol, to Isaac. This visit signifies a shift in Abimelech's attitude and the establishment of peace and reconciliation between Isaac and Abimelech. The passage teaches us the importance of seeking reconciliation and recognizing God's faithfulness in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 27. And Isaac said unto them, Wherefore come ye to me, seeing ye hate me, and have sent me away from you? This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac's life and his interactions with the people of Gerar. To fully understand the significance of this verse, it is important to consider the context and events leading up to it. In Genesis chapter 26, we find that Isaac, the son of Abraham, faced a severe famine in the land of Canaan, similar to what his father experienced. In response to the famine, Isaac went to Gerar, where Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, reigned. In Gerar, Isaac encountered challenges, particularly related to his wife, Rebekah. Verse 26 tells us that Abimelech went to Isaac from Gerar, along with Gerar, one of his friends, and Phicol, the chief captain of his army. This group approached Isaac, likely seeking to establish a covenant or make a treaty with him. However, Isaac responded to them with a question in verse 27, asking why they came to him, considering that they seemed to harbor animosity toward him and had previously sent him away. Isaac's question reveals that he perceived hostility or ill will from this group of people. It suggests that they had mistreated him in some way, leading to his departure from their presence. Despite this, they now sought his company, which Isaac found perplexing. The subsequent verses shed light on Isaac's decision to engage with them. He eventually entered into a covenant with Abimelech, indicating a resolution of their differences and the establishment of peaceful relations between Isaac and the people of Gerar. From a broader perspective, this verse highlights the complexities of human relationships and the dynamics of reconciliation. Isaac's question captures his confusion regarding the sudden change in the attitude of those who had previously treated him poorly. It prompts us to reflect on the nature of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the importance of understanding one another's motives. The passage also serves as a reminder that, as followers of God, we are called to extend grace and seek reconciliation even when faced with past hurts or animosity. Isaac's willingness to engage in dialogue and ultimately make peace with Abimelech demonstrates the importance of forgiveness and seeking harmony. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 27 presents a snapshot of Isaac's interaction with the people of Gerar, highlighting the themes of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the potential for transformation in human relationships. Genesis chapter 26 verse 28. And they said, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, Let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee. This verse is part of the narrative of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his interaction with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, in the land of Gerar. Isaac had gone to Gerar during a time of famine and had become prosperous through God's blessings. His wealth and success had caused envy and concern among the Philistines, and they had asked him to move away. In response, Isaac moved his encampment to a different location. In Genesis chapter 26 verses 26 through 27, it is mentioned that Abimelech came to visit Isaac, along with his advisor Gerar and the commander of his army, Phicol. During their visit, they witnessed Isaac's prosperity and acknowledged that it was evident that the Lord was with him. They recognized that Isaac's success was not merely a result of his own efforts but was due to the divine favor upon him. In verse 28, Abimelech and his men propose making a covenant or an oath with Isaac. This offer was a significant gesture in ancient times and carried weight in terms of establishing peace, mutual protection, and cooperation between different parties. By making a covenant, Abimelech and his associates sought to secure a favorable relationship with Isaac and ensure that Isaac's prosperity would not pose a threat to them. They recognized that it was in their best interest to have Isaac as an ally rather than an adversary. This verse demonstrates the recognition of God's presence and blessings in Isaac's life by the Philistines. It also highlights the importance of making covenants and oaths as a means of establishing trust, peace, and cooperation between individuals or groups. The subsequent verses describe the details of the covenant they made, which included an agreement to refrain from harming each other and to live in peace. From a broader perspective, this passage also illustrates God's faithfulness to his promises and the fulfillment of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac's father. Despite facing difficulties, Isaac experienced God's blessings and protection, just as God had promised to Abraham. The recognition of God's presence by the Philistines serves as a testament to the faithfulness of God's promises and his ability to bless his chosen people. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 28 reveals the acknowledgement of God's presence and blessings in Isaac's life by Abimelech and his associates. It emphasizes the significance of making covenants as a means of establishing peace and cooperation. Additionally, it reflects God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises to Abraham and highlights the role of divine favor in the prosperity of his people. Genesis chapter 26 verse 29. And they said, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. And we said, Let there be now an oath betwixt us, even betwixt us and thee, and let us make a covenant with thee. Genesis chapter 26 verse 29 occurs in the context of the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, who was blessed by God. Let's explore the verse in its broader context to gain a better understanding. The chapter begins by recounting a severe famine in the land of Canaan, where Isaac dwelt. In response, Isaac sought refuge in Gerar, the land of the Philistines. As Isaac and his family settled there, he became apprehensive about the safety of his wife, Rebekah, due to her exceptional beauty. Consequently, Isaac introduced Rebekah as his sister to protect himself from potential harm. However, King Abimelech of Gerar eventually discovered the truth and confronted Isaac about the deception. Remarkably, instead of punishing Isaac, Abimelech recognized the presence of God's favor upon him. This acknowledgement forms the backdrop for Genesis chapter 26 verse 29. In this verse, Abimelech and his people approach Isaac and declare, We saw certainly that the Lord was with thee. Their observation of Isaac's life and experiences led him to recognize the divine presence and blessing that rested upon him. It is important to note that the acknowledgement of God's favor was not limited to Isaac alone, it extended to his entire household. Abimelech and his people desired to make a covenant with Isaac. They proposed an oath or agreement, recognizing the mutual benefits that would come from such a partnership. This covenant aimed to establish a peaceful relationship, ensuring the safety and security of both parties involved. This passage highlights several significant themes. Divine favor. The recognition of God's presence and blessing in the life of Isaac demonstrates the impact of a life lived in alignment with God's will. Isaac's faithfulness and obedience to God led to blessings not only for him, but also for those around him. Witness to God's work. Abimelech and his people bore witness to God's favor upon Isaac. Observing Isaac's life and experiences allowed him to discern the hand of God at work. This serves as a reminder that our lives can be a testimony to the reality of God's presence and blessings. Covenant relationship. The proposal of a covenant signifies the desire for a mutually beneficial relationship between Isaac and the people of Gerar. It demonstrates the importance of establishing agreements and partnerships based on trust and shared objectives. God's protection. Through this encounter, God protected Isaac and his family. Despite Isaac's initial deception, God's grace prevailed, and he turned what could have been a disastrous situation into an opportunity for reconciliation and covenant-making. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 29 illustrates the power of a life lived in accordance with God's will and the impact it can have on others. Isaac's faithfulness led to the recognition of God's presence and the establishment of a covenant relationship. This passage serves as a reminder to live in a way that reflects God's favor and to seek harmonious relationships based on trust and mutual benefit. Genesis chapter 26 verse 30. And he made him a feast, and they did eat and drink. This verse is a part of the account of Isaac's life and his interaction with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Let's explore the context and key themes of this verse. Context. In Genesis chapter 26, we find Isaac living in the land of Gerar during a time of famine. Similar to his father Abraham, Isaac tells the people that his wife Rebekah is his sister to protect himself. However, Abimelech discovers the truth and confronts Isaac about it. Isaac, fearing for his life, receives a warning from God not to fear, for God is with him. Isaac then plants crops in the land, and the Lord blesses him abundantly, resulting in great prosperity. Hospitality and reconciliation. Genesis chapter 26 verse 30 portrays a significant event where Abimelech and his people come to Isaac after witnessing the Lord's blessings upon him. It is a remarkable shift in their relationship. In response, Isaac extends hospitality by preparing a feast for Abimelech and his companions. This act of hosting a meal signifies Isaac's desire for peace, reconciliation, and goodwill between their two parties. It also highlights the importance of showing kindness and hospitality, even to those who may have initially been adversarial. Symbolic meaning. Feasting in the Bible often carries symbolic meaning. It can represent celebration, abundance, unity, and fellowship. In this context, Isaac's feast represents the reconciliation and friendship between Isaac's household and Abimelech's people. It signifies the restoration of peace and the establishment of mutual trust. This feast serves as a pivotal moment of reconciliation, demonstrating Isaac's desire to live in harmony with the people of Gerar. Lessons for believers. Isaac's actions in hosting a feast and extending hospitality carry valuable lessons for believers today. It emphasizes the importance of forgiveness, reconciliation, and the pursuit of peace. As followers of God, we are called to be peacemakers and ambassadors of reconciliation, seeking to heal broken relationships and foster unity. Isaac's act of hosting a feast encourages us to extend kindness, generosity, and hospitality, even to those who may have been adversaries or difficult to deal with. It reminds us of the transformative power of love and forgiveness. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 30 portrays Isaac's act of hosting a feast for Abimelech and his companions, symbolizing reconciliation and peace. This verse teaches us about the importance of extending hospitality, pursuing peace, and fostering unity in our relationships. It encourages us to be ambassadors of reconciliation and exemplifies the transformative power of forgiveness and love. Genesis chapter 26 verse 31. And they rose up betimes in the morning, and sware one to another, and Isaac sent him away, and they departed from him in peace. Context. Genesis chapter 26 recounts the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, during a time of famine. Isaac traveled to Gerar, where he faced challenges and conflicts over water rights with the people of the land. Despite these challenges, God blessed Isaac, and he became prosperous. In this verse, we see Isaac making a covenant with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, and his commander Phicol. Rising early in the morning, the verse begins by highlighting the time of day when Isaac and the others rose up early. This detail suggests their eagerness and sincerity in making this covenant. It also indicates Isaac's initiative and willingness to take the lead in resolving conflicts peacefully. Swearing an oath. Isaac and Abimelech swore an oath to one another, making a solemn commitment. Oaths were common in ancient times and carried great weight. By swearing an oath, They were binding themselves to uphold their agreement and abide by the terms of the covenant. Isaac's role: Isaac took the initiative in sending Abimelech and his company away. This act demonstrates Isaac's desire for peaceful resolution and his willingness to let go of any lingering conflict. By sending him away in peace, Isaac demonstrated his commitment to living harmoniously with his neighbors. Lessons from the passage: peaceful resolution. Isaac's actions teach us the importance of seeking peaceful resolutions to conflicts. Rather than harboring grudges or escalating disputes, we should strive for peace and reconciliation. Taking the lead, Isaac's proactive approach shows us the value of taking the initiative in resolving conflicts. Instead of waiting for others to act, we can step forward and initiate peacemaking efforts. Commitment and integrity. The act of swearing an oath underscores the importance of commitment and integrity in our interactions with others. When we make promises or agreements, we should honor them faithfully. Application: seek peace. As followers of Christ, we are called to be peacemakers. Matthew chapter 5 verse 9. Let us strive to resolve conflicts and promote harmony in our relationships and communities. Initiate reconciliation. Don't wait for others to make the first move. Take the initiative in resolving conflicts and seek reconciliation with those you may have disagreements or tensions with. Be faithful in your commitments. Just as Isaac and Abimelech upheld their covenant, let us honor our promises and commitments to others. Our integrity reflects our faithfulness to God and demonstrates Christ's love in our lives. Genesis chapter 26 verse 31 provides a powerful example of seeking peace and making covenants to resolve conflicts. It reminds us of the importance of taking the initiative, being faithful to our commitments, and embodying Christ's teachings in our relationships. Genesis chapter 26 verse 32. And it came to pass the same day, that Isaac's servants came, and told him concerning the well which they had digged, and said unto him, We have found water. This verse is part of the narrative surrounding Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his experiences in the land of Gerar. In this chapter, Isaac encounters various challenges and blessings, and Genesis chapter 26 verse 32 specifically focuses on the discovery of a well by his servants. The context leading up to this verse begins in Genesis chapter 26 verse 15 when the Philistines had filled the wells that Abraham, Isaac's father, had dug during his lifetime. Isaac, facing scarcity of water, reopens the wells his father had dug, giving them the same names that Abraham had given them. The Philistines, however, continue to quarrel with Isaac over the wells, claiming them as their own. Eventually, Isaac moves away from the Philistines and finds a place where he can settle. In Genesis chapter 26 verse 32, we learn that on the same day Isaac's servants dig a well, they find water. This discovery is significant because water is a vital resource, particularly in arid regions like the land of Gerar. The finding of water is an answer to Isaac's need and a demonstration of God's provision. From a broader perspective, this verse highlights a few important themes found throughout the Bible. God's faithfulness. Isaac's reliance on God is rewarded as his servants discover water. This verse reflects God's faithfulness to provide for his people, even in challenging circumstances. It reminds us that when we trust in God and seek his guidance, he is faithful to meet our needs. Perseverance and diligence. Despite the opposition and conflict over the wells, Isaac continues to dig, reopen, and seek water sources. This perseverance and diligence can be seen as an example for believers to persist in their endeavors, even when faced with challenges. Ownership and stewardship. The dispute over the wells highlights the importance of property rights and the responsible use of resources. Isaac, as a landowner, seeks to claim the wells and the water that sustains life. This serves as a reminder for believers to be good stewards of the resources entrusted to them, recognizing that they ultimately belong to God. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 32 captures a small but meaningful moment in the life of Isaac. It showcases God's provision, Isaac's perseverance, and the significance of water as a valuable resource. Studying this verse encourages us to trust in God's faithfulness, to diligently pursue our endeavors, and to responsibly manage the resources entrusted to us. Genesis chapter 26 verse 33. And he called it Sheba, therefore the name of the city is Beersheba unto this day. Context: Genesis chapter 26 tells the story of Isaac, the son of Abraham, and his experiences in the land of Gerar. Famine led Isaac to go to Gerar, where he faced challenges and conflicts with the Philistines. In this verse, Isaac establishes a well and names the city Beersheba. The significance of the name Sheba: Isaac named the city Sheba, which means oath or 7. This name is likely connected to the covenant God made with Isaac's father, Abraham. The covenant included promises of numerous descendants and the inheritance of the land. By naming the city Sheba, Isaac may have been acknowledging God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of his promises. The establishment of the city, Isaac's act of digging a well and naming the city, was significant. Wells were vital in the ancient world, providing a reliable water source for survival and prosperity. By digging a well, Isaac demonstrated his commitment to settling in the land and his determination to thrive despite the challenges he faced. The establishment of the city marked a significant point in Isaac's life and the history of the Israelites. Beersheba's ongoing significance: the name Beersheba, meaning well of the oath or well of 7, continues to be associated with this city even to this day. Beersheba became an important location in the biblical narrative, often serving as a boundary or landmark for different tribes and kingdoms. Spiritual lessons from Genesis chapter 26 verse 33. Faithfulness to God's promises. Isaac's act of naming the city Sheba reflects his recognition of God's faithfulness in fulfilling his promises. It reminds us of the importance of trusting in God's covenantal promises and acknowledging his faithfulness throughout our lives. Commitment in challenging times. Isaac's decision to dig a well and establish the city despite the opposition and conflicts with the Philistines teaches us the importance of perseverance and commitment to God's purposes even when faced with adversity. The significance of landmarks. Beersheba's enduring name reminds us of the value of landmarks in our spiritual journey. Just as Beersheba served as a reminder of God's faithfulness, we can establish personal landmarks or milestones to remind ourselves of God's goodness and provision in our lives. In summary, Genesis chapter 26 verse 33 highlights Isaac's act of naming the city Beersheba, signifying his acknowledgement of God's faithfulness and the fulfillment of his promises. It teaches us important lessons about faithfulness to God's promises, commitment in challenging times, and the significance of spiritual landmarks. Genesis chapter 26 verse 34. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath the daughter of Elon the Hittite. This verse is found in the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Old Testament. It is part of the account of the life of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, and the father of Jacob and Esau. In this particular verse, we are given information about Esau, one of Isaac's twin sons. It states that when Esau was 40 years old, he took 2 wives, Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. This verse raises several important points to consider. Marriage practices. The verse provides insight into the marriage practices of the time. Marrying from within the family or tribe was common in ancient societies, including among the Israelites. However, in this instance, Esau chose to marry Hittite women, who were not part of his own lineage. This decision would later cause distress for his parents and would have significant consequences for his descendants. Esau's choice. Esau's decision to marry Hittite women is notable because it deviates from the expected pattern of marrying within the family. The Hittites were a people who lived in the region of Canaan during that period. Some commentators suggest that Esau's choice reflects a disregard for his birthright and the spiritual heritage of his family. Consequences. The passage does not immediately reveal the consequences of Esau's choice of wives. However, Subsequent events in the biblical narrative illustrate that this decision led to tension and conflict within the family. Esau's marriages to Hittite women caused great distress to his parents, Isaac and Rebekah, who were concerned about the spiritual implications of such unions. Later, when Jacob obtained the blessing that was meant for Esau, Esau's anger toward his brother escalated, and a long-standing family feud ensued. This verse serves as a reminder of the importance of considering the consequences of our choices, especially in matters that have long-term implications for ourselves and those around us. It also highlights the significance of honoring family and spiritual heritage. Overall, Genesis chapter 26 verse 34 provides a glimpse into the life of Esau and sets the stage for future events in the biblical narrative, emphasizing the consequences of his decision to marry Hittite women and the subsequent challenges faced by the family.